Oh, I wonder if I did something wrong. Is it playing?
We are live.
Yes, we are live. However, I must
We
have
are
done
live.
something wrong.
Windows updates changed everything. Used to be a way it just screwed up on it screwed everything up. Can't turn the volume up on the speaker. Don't know how to do it.
I'm playing the intro right now.
Team with the precisely on time.
Hey.
There he is, late as always.
He was right on time.
Well, it worked. I got the intro to play with sound. Well, it worked. I got the intro. Okay.
Counts.
I like the shrew picture, man.
Okay.
Counts.
All right, everybody. We are live once again, Friday,
I like the shrew picture.
September 13th. That's Friday the 13th. Welcome, everybody, to another exciting episode of Conspiracy or Not Here We Come for your listening displeasure. We have Gandalf and Amy, as usual, but we also have a very interesting guest by the name of TheSteepSix. He is a clinical psychologist, so welcome, everybody, and welcome, TheSteepSix.
How's it going, everyone?
Thank you, Aaron. Well,
Yeah, TheSteepSix, man. This is the first I've ever talked to you, so I'm really looking forward to this, man.
You sound a lot better, Gandalf. Feeling
it's
better?
nice to meet you, Gandalf.
Yeah, it's still kind of there. Like I'm fucking hacking, still sneezing, man. But I feel good, man. I'm not really like I was. Oh, it was the most terrible sickness I think I've had in years last week.
Okay, so welcome. We've got Allison Twist is hanging out with us already. Amy, how you been?
Oh, I've been hanging in. Getting by slowly but surely.
All right, so TheSteepSix, your first name is Daniel, and it shows up on your avatar, so I'm just going to refer to you as Daniel from now on, if that's all right with you. So that'll should.
That's fine.
So you are indeed a clinical psychologist, correct?
Yes.
Do us a favor, bring us up to speed. Tell us a little bit give us a little background on you and how you kind of got into doing what you're doing, how you came across our channel, and you came to meet Amy, and just sort of introduce yourself.
Yeah, I always thought that you deserved a bigger audience. I enjoyed the show that you do, and I'll bring you up to speed on me. I started out working. I think my first job was a lifesaver at a lake nearby. Second job was picking fruit, and my third job was a protective service officer in the security industry, and I worked there for about 10 years. The industry got a little bit rough for me in the end, and I decided to follow basically a passion I had in behavioral science. So I used um, my status as an Aborigine to get free university education, and I completed a degree course, a 4-year degree course in 2 years because I was in a hurry and getting older, which was a community science and services degree in behavioral sciences, which qualifies me as a clinical psychologist, but we prefer to call ourselves counselors. There's a bit of a stigma that comes along with being called a psychologist, especially in the, the community that uh, like to question things, tend to blame psychologists for a lot of the problems in, and to some extent, there is truth in that. I mean, I had professors who were communists, made no bones about that, and we'd get into arguments, and we'd have to shut the whole thing down before, it got out of control. I was never excluded for disagreeing with communism, and only one of the professors I had was a card-carrying communist, but most of the others were in some way socialist, or at the very least, in my opinion, politically correct to a point of nausea. So it was a bit of a struggle to get through, and that was another reason why I was in a hurry to do it, so I didn't have to deal with these people for too long. But there is a lot more to psychology than most people understand, and we all live our lives every day to some extent, meeting people, using our own, our own body language and our voice to communicate in certain ways. Some people manipulate, some people, and we're going to get there. Some people go into politics and they turn psychology into a profession politically, and you'd call that rhetoric. And so, for example, Barack Obama is a lawyer, but that law degree, at some point, he studied psychology. And he became a terrific orator. And he ended up becoming president of the United States. His voice. And just recently, Donald Trump did the same thing. It was, they were able to sort of mesmerize the population with the words that come out of their mouth and the way that they say it, to a point that gets them into the highest positions of power. And so we see a lot of politicians are lawyers. And so in law, psychology is extremely important. Yeah. So I want to talk about flat Earth
Okay.
because I have like a personal interest, because I did actually see a convincing video, and it got me thinking that how did I know that the Earth was round? It was a sphere. How did I know that? And I couldn't really answer that question. And then one video led to the next, and after I'd watched about 10 videos and 10 or 20 hours later, I was starting to question my reality, that I believed all my life that the Earth was a sphere. And I thought, well, the damn thing could be flat. And in order for me to deal with that, I really had to then go deeply into the science and try and understand that in a way that made sense to me. And in doing so, basically undid the conditioning that had occurred while I was watching those flat Earth videos. Now, there are some, and then I went back and rewatched them with an open mind, and I discovered that what's going on there is that some of them do believe that the Earth is flat. I believe they believe, but the majority of them and the bigger voices, I think, is Mark Sargent one of the leaders? Is that a name? Have I got that right?
Yeah, he is, and I have an interesting video to share.
Yes,
Okay, now
yes.
Mark Sargent, I was watching videos on him because big question marks come up when I was watching him being interviewed. And I can assure you that he does not believe it himself. Okay, I am 99% sure that Mark Sargent does not believe the Earth is flat.
What makes
To
you
him,
say that? I agree with you. I totally agree. In fact, most people who are familiar with Mark Sargent would completely agree with that statement. I'm
Yes, yes.
curious
well,
from
that's
from
good
your
to hear.
from your point of view, someone who has had courses in psychology and works as a basically a psychologist. Um, what clued you into this?
His body language. It was purely his body language. He was, and the one that really did it was, for me, was when he was taken to the beach. He was shown something go over the horizon, and he said, "Well, that's heat." Okay, and the reporter who was interviewing him said, "Do you really believe that?" And the camera was trained on him when she said that, and his body language was 100% consistent with someone who did not believe that. he he basically laughed at himself at that point. Now, he was either really stoned and couldn't control it, or he truly doesn't believe it. But sometimes people who are stoned, it's harder for them to hide the reality of what they're doing. So I see the flat Earth community as a portion of it are people who are practicing rhetoric, and they may be under direction. They may get a thrill out of causing discord. Um, and another portion are people who believe it and they run with it, and it becomes their reality. And the ones the, who cling on to it bitterly and believe it are the ones that you will never change their mind, because those people are actually sociopathic. And if you are to question their belief, the way they believe it, because they're convinced that they're right, if you are actually to put them in a situation where they actually have to question reasonably their belief, you're making you're sort of opening up pathways to force them to question other parts of their lives, which to do with a sociopath, it can actually cause more harm than good. So getting into an argument with someone who truly believes the earth is flat, and someone who starts saying things like everything's CGI, and I see these videos where people started to tell me that the sky was all CGI. Um, Videos and pictures taken of the planet are CGI, and some of them are. Um, NASA has a bunch of composite pictures of the planet that they say this is the Earth, and there are a couple of contradicting photos of what they say is the planet, and there's only 10 years difference between them. And then there's anomalies with the, going to the moon and space flight, and those small things that we can't explain and we needn't bother with are is the genesis of this everything is a lie conspiracy theory. And it's healthy to question reality. It's humans try to make sense out of everything that we see. But some for some people, their whole lives kind of get wrapped up in this, I've been deceived and I need to find the truth. And when they go down a road like um, all the history we've been taught is a lie, and once they've gone a certain distance down this road and they've made videos telling people that that's the case, they'll never be able to go back for a percentage of people. And these are the people who are more likely to make videos. These are the people who um, they want to make themselves popular. They want people to listen to what they have to say. And this is not everybody, but this is one of the tendencies of a sociopath or a psychopath or a narcissistic personality. So the people who have made the most videos and gotten the most attention on the subject are the least likely to actually go back and question the beliefs that they had in the first place. And there's a couple of people online who I really do admire, but have they have a touch of this. And um, David Icke and Max Egan are two.
Go ahead.
Okay, now, I don't believe that either of those people are deliberate shills, or they're accused of it often. I know Max personally, and I'd love to meet David, but I do believe that they both believe what they say is true. And now, Max, his education was limited and a sort of an autodidactic, what I've read sort of thing. And you can get to a point, and I think Alex Jones has done this himself with history, where he's read too many history books and then starts spouting things off that make no sense and are not said anywhere that I can find. But Max, his lack of education, his lack of formal education has led him to the belief that what he knows, he's making a statement that the English language has been corrupted. Now, he has actually gone to university and studied English. And he used to make that statement. We can't know why, but because English is basically, you know, for him, it's not that great. And yes, for him, maybe he does struggle in articulating his points, but the truth of the matter is that English is one of the better languages on the planet for describing anything you want. He'll say something like, what does the word tree mean? How does it describe a tree? And then I'm thinking, oh God, Max, you know, like we have a name for every tree. Okay, now if you want to describe your tree, you say the name of the tree that you want to describe. And we have 3 words for tree. And they come from the Greek and the Latin and the French. And English is a conglomerate of basically 5 languages, which is why we have 4 or 5 words for just about everything that we say, and subtle differences in meaning. And there are not many languages on the planet like this. French, they're very patriotic and very protective of their language, and they won't allow new words into it. So they are restricted. They will, French people will learn English or German so that they can communicate more clearly with other people. They didn't have this problem because anyone who was academic knew Latin, and Latin was the language of Europe, and you could go anywhere in the continent and you could listen to lectures and you could speak to other students in Latin. The biggest mistake that happened in education was taking that Latin away from, Western Europe. That happened about 200 or 150 years ago, and it died off completely about 60 years ago, where Latin is no longer taught to anyone except and doctors. But it was a brilliant way for all of Europe to communicate. But the result of this is, in English, is that about we have about 3 times or 4 times more words than any other language on the planet. And whether or not we know these, most people operate on a vocabulary of about 500 words. Um, People who are educated and whose brains are working work between 10 and 20,000 words. But like we have 1 million words to choose from, and this is all the time you'll be reading and you'll see a word and you, what the hell does that mean? And this is where, dictionaries come in handy, and now the internet. So I'll be reading a book and I'll see a word and I'll go, well, I can't remember, or I don't know what that means. So I type it into Google and I get a definition for it. And it's happening all the time. And through doing that, we can actually build our vocabulary. And I think if Max was as well read as he used to be, and as well educated in history as he claims to be, then this would have happened to him, and he would have realized himself how diverse the language is. But he's sort of taking himself down this path where, now, have you heard of the mud flood?
Oh, yes.
Okay,
I
now,
knew that's where you were going to go when you brought up Max Egan.
Yep. I've heard of the mud flood.
I don't know. I don't know if the world was flooded in 1850 because I'm not 170 years old, but it's unlikely. And anybody with a reasonable grasp on history would understand this. And the photos and the proof that something did happen, so incongruent that for someone as intelligent as Max to run with it and to make it a part of his a part of his product, or so to speak, is irresponsible. Okay, because he does have the ear of 250,000 people, and they hang on every word he says, and he brings up things that these people then believe. So, look, one of my favorite quote in the whole world is written down here. And this is how it goes. It's, he who should know the history of words would know all history. And that was written politically incorrect, of course, or incorrect probably isn't the right word, politically inadequate. But it was written in 1949 by a historian named Will Durant. And now, Will Durant, did you read, Rufus, that chapter I sent you? The dialogue between Benedict XIV and Voltaire?
Oh no, I'm terribly sorry. I it's I meant to, and I meant to get back to it, and it slipped my mind, and I didn't get back to it. So no, haven't read it yet.
I'll forgive you. Read it in the future. I'd love to discuss this with you because you and I, we can debate theology because you are an atheist and I am a Christian, but I'm not the kind of Christian that you think most people are. And I don't really think you're the kind of atheist that most people are. But that dialogue, which is, what was it? Something in Elysium? That dialogue it was written by Will Durant after writing a book on Voltaire, The Age of Voltaire. and it it basically crystallizes religion, and not so much the controlling factor of religion, although that is an element to it, but the civilizing influence of religion, the the unifying aspect of religion, and Benedict says to Voltaire, "Where do you get off in one lifetime in questioning the wisdom of an entire race over thousands of years?" And now, Will Durant himself was an atheist, but in the end, he said, I, I kind of question that belief now. After studying all history, he still wasn't a theologian, but he started to understand that religion throughout history actually had quite a positive impact in many ways. And we can argue all day the the pros and cons of that, with the Inquisitions and the the subversions and
Hmm. And the
okay,
suppression of science
the suppression of science, but
and the
a lot
subversion
of
of
that's
women and slavery and the endorsement of slavery and the subjugation of women.
yeah. Now
So,
this is see the church was made up of men, and it became an institution, the Catholic Church, and that institution of men became corrupt because it was made up of men. But it was the only institution. It was the political, the center of the world, and because of that, that's where all the people who wanted power gravitated. And as a result, we get these horrible things that come out of it. And then there was a backlash, which was the Reformation and the Albigensian movement, the Cathars in southern France. They seem to have a secret that when you look into that more deeply, you'll see that they weren't so religious, and all of the things that you hate about religion, they did too. And of course, they were wiped out to a man, woman, and child, and everyone in the area was wiped out because the established church could not allow that uh, ideology to spread, threatened their monopoly on power. That does not indict religion itself. That indicts men. That indicts humanity as a whole. Humanity did that, not
so,
really.
so when you say that they hated all the things about religion that I hate, or that you think that I hate, would that include the fact that and I'll just express one of the things I hate most about religion in general, not specific religion, not the action that men in religion have taken, but religion in general gets grown adults to believe in things for which there is no good reason to believe.
That's a
I
sweeping
mean,
generalization.
I mean,
But those
I
things that
put
you
that as
rattled
I
off
put that
before,
as tactfully as I possibly could. What I wanted to say, in a more harsh sense, is that it gets intelligent grown people to believe in fairy tales.
well, the established religions have done that. They've done that forever. And you have, for an example, the flood. Now, the flood story, clearly a thinking person doesn't need to believe that the entire world was flooded. Okay, but there was an ice age and it did end, and there were massive floods all over the world, and geologists will tell you this.
Hmm.
Uh, Hundreds of flood myths, and the the Hebrew version of the flood myth is basically a copy of the Babylonian flood myth, which was a copy of the Assyrian flood myth, which was a copy of the original flood myth from Mesopotamia, which came from the Sumerians. The name changed every time, and slight details did, but the overall story and what was is the same. And whether or not that happened in the Black Sea or in the Mesopotamian valleys is neither here nor there, but there would have been at some point in human's history a great flood in that area, and somebody survived, and whether they were told to by a spirit or a god or aliens is up for debate, but someone survived because they told the story. And, I can't sit here and say I believe that Noah survived the flood and that we are all descendants of Noah. I can't say that Adam and Eve, were the first two people and that we are all descendants from Adam and Eve, because none of that really makes logical sense. There are movements within Christianity, and they are silenced by the established religions who appreciate the power that they have over people. And they're shut down, and we can go right back to the first saints who were saying that what I'm saying now is that these stories that came out of religion we need, when we, with our senses and our reason, discover things about the world, we should then question our interpretation of scripture. Now, that was heresy, but that was, in the beginning of Christianity, that was actually a very powerful movement. And now I've got to get this right. It was the movement who didn't believe that Jesus was the Son of God, that he did exist, but he wasn't an incarnation of God. And I can't think of the name. I share a name with somebody else. But they became the most heretical part of Christianity very early on because they were questioning a doctrine and dogma. And doctrine and dogma have maintained its grip on the Christian religion throughout history and have made it this institution that you and I both despise. But the core of Christianity itself, the lessons, the oral histories that were turned into written histories, the learning and the generations of accumulated knowledge, there is something there that has benefited civilization. And basically, it is that we as humans are inclined to selfishness, because for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, if we weren't, we were dead and we didn't breed. We had to be selfish, we had to be licentious, we had to be ready to steal and kill, and we had to be moralless. We had to have no moral compass in the way that we look at it today as hunter-gatherers initially. Otherwise,
We had
our
no
genes,
moral compass.
that's right,
You,
because
you
our
think you
genes
think
would.
that's true? You think we had no moral compass? You think that's true?
No, I think we do now, and
Well, wait, well,
maybe
no, wait a minute. Even as hunter-gatherers, we were still a social species, correct?
in a way that what.
Doesn't it benefit a group who is engaged in social species type activity? Wouldn't it benefit the group to have moral compass? And is it not observed in primate species and literally in dog species and other types of social species, literally like pigs, species that have a hierarchy among their troops, that there is some moral compass even among the lower animals?
Oh, sure, and that to survive as a species, we must have that at our core, and that's what came through as civilization developed, and groups of people had to come to live together who are disparate people had to come to live together in harmony without killing each other and stealing each other's stuff and screwing each other's wives and causing chaos in the community.
I like the
This,
I like the way Christopher Hitchens puts it when he says, "Am I to believe that the 2 million Jews who exited Egypt and wandered in the desert for 40 years, made it all the way to Mount Sinai, had no idea that killing, raping, and perjury were wrong until they got to the foot of Mount Sinai and Moses came down and all of a sudden they realized, oh, that's not kosher.
Well,
They wouldn't have made it that far, he says, and I agree. It's just not possible that these ideas, this quote unquote golden rule, this idea that morality comes from God, morality comes from religion, I find that laughable.
no, but it as a unifying, like the first set of laws that we know about were written by someone named Urukagina, and he said, "I'm king. These are the laws, and you have to follow them." Those laws we know about because they were chiseled in diorite, and we've dug up the rocks that have his laws written on them, and they were written in about 3000 BC. They didn't last very long, and the reason they didn't last very long, in my opinion, is because he said these are my laws. The next set of laws to come out that people actually start to follow came from Hammurabi, and he didn't say these are my laws. He said these are God's laws. God's telling you to do this. And the priests enforce those laws, not the actual king or the leader himself. So Hammurabi's laws are still with us today. But what I'm trying to say is that as a way to get men who are we are instinctual species, and instinctually we are selfish. We have to train ourselves not to be. And for communities, large numbers of people to come together and live in communities, it was necessary maybe to stretch the truth or to lie to them about where these directives on how to live come from. Because if we're going to do it and we're not going to be running around killing each other, stealing each other's stuff, and screwing each other's wives and fighting all the time, we need to have this code of ethics. And the best way that the people who were trying to make that happen at that time understood was to say that this is coming from the gods. Now, this is probably a superstitious element within humans, that we don't know how far it goes back. We've seen chimpanzees worshipping waterfalls. Well, what anthropologists would say looks like they're worshipping waterfalls. So maybe that superstitious element in humanity was a blessing in a way when it came to saying, let's get together, let's work together, and let's not do all these things. And the 10 Commandments, if you strike off the first three, which basically are saying, you know, you must follow the rest because I am the ultimate God. If you strike them off and you just look at them, they are the set of morals by which we need to live if we wish to live in harmony and without conflict, constant conflict and upheaval.
Uh-huh. And how's that worked so far?
Well, look at where we've come.
Yeah, yeah, in constant conflict.
Yeah, it's a
So,
constant,
so
because that
my question
instinct in
again, how's that
humanity is
worked so far?
always there. That instinct is always there. It's still there now, and it's probably going to take 1,000,000 years to get rid of it, or maybe tens of thousands of years. But if what we're told is true, and civilization is only 5,000 years old, give or take a millennial or two, then for us to have changed, for our natures to have changed in that amount of time is unrealistic to think. Okay, so the reason we still see all of this stuff going on is because that is the instinct of humans. Okay, that is going to be there for a long time to come. And to get us off the ground, to get civilization working, we needed to have some sort of superstitious belief that, and it manifested in an afterlife, and maybe there is some spiritual thing that happens after we die. Maybe there's not, but people had to be told that their behavior in this life was going to affect what happened to them for eternity. And that was the only way at that point in time to get people to actually stop killing each other, screwing each other's wives.
And that didn't work very well, did it?
But it did. If it didn't work at all, we wouldn't be in any kind of civilization now. We would still be constantly fighting.
We are constantly fighting.
Well, we aren't. I mean, it's, yes, and we can now take this to a conspiracy level where the people in charge of us want us to do these things, and it's easy for them to convince us to do these things because they are at the core of our nature, and they can manipulate humanity to do these things.
Even if we don't go to the conspiracy side of things, people have a natural proclivity to, mostly I think because of their own egos, people have a natural proclivity to one-up each other. And in terms of a social species like ours, who have the ability to communicate through language, we one-up each other by proving each other wrong. And you can see this all the time on Hangouts. You can see it in comment sections, comment threads. You see it where any type of social interaction is occurring, particularly online, where people have a little bit more free reign to speak their mind because they have anonymity. And you're not standing in front of someone who you're offending, and you don't have the threat of getting punched in the mouth when you say something foul, and you can really express how you really feel, which is a lot of what goes on in these comment threads. And then we always find ourselves in these silly micro debates between each other, where we're always trying to, even in situations where we maybe mostly agree with each other, we tend to play devil's advocate. It's a natural, and this is why I wanted to talk to you. This is a subject, I have a note on this specifically, how we have a natural tendency to play devil's advocate with each other. I think, and you can speak to this as someone who's got some psychology training, that this natural proclivity for people to play devil's advocate with each other and with ourselves is a form it's a form of one-upmanship. It's I think largely powered by the ego, and
Yes.
it's driven many uncountable an infinite amount of conversations online to turn into somewhat heated debates.
Yes. Yes, this is narcissism. This is the narcissistic tendency of people, and the people who engage in this do have that. Okay, I don't. All right, I have in the past, but I won't do it anymore. And what happens is if somebody feels questioned, if someone feels like their truth is being questioned, they feel an anger rise in them. They're stirred to wrath, to a certain degree, depending on how narcissistic they are. And you will get these arguments about nothing. And it happens in comment sections. I see it, I read it, and I know what it is. But it's not everybody. It's just a section of the community who happen to be most vocal in that particular area. But you're right. It's a true representation of our core nature. If somebody has a comment on what somebody says, okay, if they disagree with them, and instead of saying, I respectfully disagree with what you say, how about this? They say, you're a fucking moron. Get your head out of your ass. Now, that is really not constructive, okay? And that there is no debate there. It is an instant argument. It's an instant battle. And then the person who's just read that comment, they feel indignant, not just that somebody has actually questioned them, but the way they've done it. They've basically insulted them.
Right.
They've insulted their intelligence.
Right.
They've insulted
And
their
because it's a public forum, now the ego starts to take over.
Yeah, so their response is disproportionate or proportionate, depending on how you look at it, and they will attack back, and you end up with horrific things being said, people who don't even know each other, and we've come full circle, and we've come back to this, like, it's like the beginning of civilization in the internet. There is no rules, there is no moral compass. people will behave in a way that is that is core to their nature, but it's contrary to living in harmony, basically. And we have noticed that children, especially, are becoming more and more depressed and more suicidal as they more and more tech. And we believe it's because they are not connecting with each other the way that you and I would have when we were kids and we had
On
no
a human level, literally going
yeah,
outside and playing physically with each other and interacting on a human level.
learning how to interact. Yeah, as children, they're not getting the same education, which is education from experience. It's not happening because a lot of their communication is happening in the internet, where there is a whole new set of rules that we as a species have never had to cope with before, which is, as you said, anonymity and um, also becoming the center of attention. We have people now going into debt to incredible amounts of debt they'll never pay back just to take selfies and post on Instagram of them wearing the latest clothes, of them going on trips to Disneyland, and they wouldn't do it, and they will get up and admit, I would never have bought that $2,000 dress, didn't have Instagram to share it with everybody on, if I didn't feel like I'd be inadequate if I didn't do it, or I wouldn't, um, if I wasn't keeping up with the Joneses, this old term.
Sure.
And that's what they're doing, not on a community level, but on a massive level. And people start with these, and it is mostly affecting people with these narcissistic tendencies that they need to feel as if people are paying attention to them. You'll see it in children, and we learn as we grow that that's probably not a great way to continue life by being the center of attention is not necessarily the greatest thing in the world. And it's people are not growing out of it. Okay. The millennials, uh,
Well, oh, hang on. Hang on. When you say people are not growing out of it, I have another question on that subject. It's an observation that I've made, and maybe I'm missing something, and you can speak to this. Amy and Gandalf and everybody in the chat maybe could weigh in. Um, it's just an observation that I've made because I've been online pretty much since, the inception of the internet, back all the way back to the days of AOL, dial-up, and all that. And something that I've noticed with the way people interact with each other, back then in the early days, people were much harsher than they are now. And I know that we just got done speaking about how people can easily get very rude and foul and harsh with each other, particularly because it's the internet and you're protected by anonymity. But something that I've noticed over the last, 15, 20 years is that even in the comment sections, if you recall 15 years ago, comment sections in chat rooms, that it was much worse than it is now. So I would disagree with you that we're not learning and growing and figuring out how to communicate in better ways, even in this realm of the internet, simply because even though you're protected by anonymity, I think that you still, you have an online presence and you have a group of friends and you have a reputation to uphold. Do you know what I mean? So maybe you could agree or disagree. Maybe you've noticed this observation, but I think that even though we can still see elements of people who can quickly get nasty at each other, I think overall there's been quite a bit of calming down. Back then, I remember it was much worse. What say you?
well, I think you're right. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the reduced anonymity that has come with the internet in recent times. In the early internet, nobody could find out who anybody was, and you were your handle, and that was it. It's not the case anymore. You have a Facebook, you have an Instagram. Well, I don't, but people do, and they do have um, an actual a personality or character that is, and a group of friends that they have online now that they have to have maintain reputation. So they have reined this back in. I have noticed it too, that people are a, a section of the community is becoming more polite. in the comment section, and I've noticed it over the last 8 years. So 8 years ago, it was vicious.
I perhaps I haven't actually seen much of that. I mean, I used to hang out in IRC back in the day, and yeah, there was always some jerk, but mostly all my experiences were reasonably, uh, you know, at least polite, if not, you know, super congenial. I never really noticed that there was a lot of nastiness.
I think most people would tend to be polite.
Yeah,
There is a section of humanity as a whole which
well,
have these narcissistic tendencies, and those are the people who are more likely to comment on a video or more likely to tweet all day and
I
respond to other people's tweets. No, I don't.
Go
I
ahead.
would tend to
Go ahead,
agree with
Gandalf.
I would tend to agree with that actually. You know, if you check out a lot of the comments that are left here and there, it's people that want attention, you know what I mean? So I just think, but to get back to where you were talking about with anonymity, I think that I think it's really an illusion of anonymity, and I think that that's starting to disappear as people get actually doxxed, and places like 4chan, people are getting you know, they're getting police sent to their door over posts that they leave on this apparently an anonymous message board.
Well, there's definitely that element. I agree with SteepSix when he brought up the idea of all these other social media outlets like Facebook and Twitch and Snapchat, and now we have the way YouTube is operating now with live streaming and everybody, a lot of people are showing their faces, whereas in the early days it was pretty damn anonymous. There were hardly anybody, if anybody, was showing their face on camera. It was a lot of reluctancy to do that. So, in that sense, I think he's correct. Where there's more of a human presence to our social media accounts, which might be part of it. I think even for those who don't have even for people who have never shown their faces, um, even some of the larger channels who have never shown their faces and don't have Facebook accounts associated with all of their family photos and all the personal stuff. I think that the idea that even your online persona, that we're trying to maintain somewhat of a credibility amongst our group, our in group, our friends, and even potential passersby, strangers, because it is a public forum, and we do have a reputation somewhat to protect, at least for those of us who give a shit about our reputation.
Yeah, totally. That's it. The larger the community has become, the more people are in the community, then the more, say, responsibility you need to take for your online presence. Now, but what Gandalf was saying is correct. It's that it's not everybody who is interacting in a antisocial way, but there is a segment of our community, our society, that has a tendency to behave antisocial. Now, those people who do it online, they would probably do it in real life as well, but it comes out sooner on the internet because there are certain barriers and there is certain disconnect from you and everyone else. You're not seeing body language, you're not getting nuance. You you read a comment and you're not hearing the way that the person says it. Okay, and you might read. I have made comments and people have read them completely the inverse of what I intended to say, and then
Right, right. There's that too, because you're lacking inflection, voice inflection, and tone of voice, things like that. I get it. Go ahead.
yes,
Sorry.
but I realize the person who has read that um, in the opposite way of what I meant it to communicate is somebody who is defensive, and this is we're always going to keep falling back on this sociopathic, narcissistic tendency of a section of our our society as a whole, which is also the most present, and these are the people who, before the internet, were, the actors and the politicians and the personalities that we all knew. Now, they even the least talented of them have an opportunity to make a presence online with an internet channel, uh, like on YouTube, a Twitter, an Instagram, or a Facebook, or something like this. And this is where we go back to the flat Earth. There is a thing about knowing something that most other people don't, and that makes a narcissistic person feel some kind of power. And if they can then project that out into the world and say, I have a secret and here's the proof, and they can use their rhetoric skills to convince you that what they believe to be true is the truth, then they feel a genuine, they get an endorphin rush or a dopamine hit that a regular person or someone who's more stable won't get. So they really do, they put their lives into this. And like, I'll watch a video and I won't bother commenting. I just can't be bothered doing it. And but there is like sometimes a part of me will want to do it, okay, and I'll want to see what other people think, but there are a lot of people who will troll, and this is them seeking attention. Okay, they're trying to get a
Well,
reaction, and
can
they'll do this to you in the real world. They'll do it to you online faster.
I would like to point something out because I basically have the impression based on the fact that one day, not having thought about the flat earth for, since they mentioned in school that back in the day some people believed the planet was flat, suddenly I had I kid you not, 5 recommended videos about the flat earth. Now, it's not like I'd ever clicked on a flat earth video before because I hadn't even thought about it. There were 5 of these, and this suggests to me that there was a push by someone with money to bring this into being as a thing. So, right off the get-go, I suggest that maybe that a lot of these people who clearly don't believe it, but are claiming to, are paid to claim it. And that there are a lot of trolls out there that are paid to troll.
Yes,
Yeah,
but you
well,
can get paid in other ways. You
I'm
can get
sorry.
paid you could get paid financially, or you could get a reward by having people believe you.
No,
And
no, no, no,
I
no.
agree. I agree that's a
She's
possibility.
talking about people who are contracted to do what they do the way they
no
do it.
doubt, no doubt, there is so many of these. Um, there are so many people on the internet who are controlled. They're being paid to do it, and the conclusion that I've come to, and I truly believe this, is that we are being demoralized. And this is not just with the flat earth thing, this is with the fake history thing and the Tartarian civilization, this magnificent civilization that everything and had everything and that we destroyed. Okay, we are monsters because we destroyed this Tartarian civilization. Now, Tartarian civilization, there is no evidence that it ever existed the way that people are saying it did. But there is plenty of historical evidence to say that there was a group of people in Siberia and Eastern Russia who went under the name Tatar. And they were like a sort of the Mongol, they were people who rode horses everywhere. They were nomadic people.
I'm
And they
not
did have,
Go ahead, Gandalf.
I'm not exactly familiar with the Tartaria thing. I've seen it around, but I'm not exactly sure what it is. I'm sorry if you guys already went over this.
It's like there's a whole community of people who believe that there was a civilization that spanned most of the world, and it was the Aryan civilization, and they are attributing all of the Greco-Roman archaeology to this civilization, and that our civilization somehow wiped it out to take control of the planet, and we killed all the adults and we spread all the children all over the world, and this happened in the 1850s, and
Oh
war
god.
happened in the 1850s, and they used mud to bury all their cities, and it is a big fantasy, but the the main takeaway from it is that people who have all their lives studied history or believed that they understood, our history in a partial way, have are being suddenly they have to bring that into question, and it's like a demoralization that everything that we ever knew was a lie.
Hmm.
Okay, and the Earth, the Earth could be flat. History could all be bullshit. 1,000 years could have been added to it, um, and on and on and on.
Yeah.
Well,
Why people invented
Hang
slavery,
on,
and
hang on, hang on. Before we get too far off of the topic of trolls, I wanted to say something. My friend in the chat, Ray of Creation, is he made a comment that I wanted to throw at you, and I think is a very valuable and worthy point to be made here. He said sometimes it's not a bad thing to have be engaged by a troll, or sometimes trolling is not a bad thing. He says sometimes trolling is a means to cut through bullshit, and it can be funny when it's not outright malicious. I would even suggest that having trolls that we all have to put up with and deal with and occasionally engage with is also a way of actually helping us to grow in a way, because it's almost a way of toughening up our skin, our metaphorical skin. Do you know what I mean?
I can't argue with any of that. That all makes perfect sense. I don't think we're talking about that sort of trolling though, especially in an antisocial way. There is good trolling. I mean, I have seen, people that they have woken up because their mind has been hit, and this is it's a it's like a psychological technique where you can actually break through someone's thinking or break into someone's thinking, and you can do it by trolling them. You can and getting a reaction that not only causes them to have an emotional response, but they think at the same time. Bad trolling is just called just an emotional response. There's no thinking. It's just an attack.
Even I would suggest even an individual who is narcissistically trolling for the pure pleasure of just, renting space in your head and occupying, gobbling up your time, and someone who's just attention seeking. For the person on the other end, the normal person who's trying to deal with or engage someone like that, I think it still has use. There's still a usefulness. And again, my friend Ray of Creation, Josh, says, only through struggle you receive growth. And I have to agree with that. So, in a sense, there's always a positive to every negative. Do you know what I mean?
I will say that I fully enjoy dealing with some of the trolls. You know, it's a pleasure to be able to put out data that countermands them. And I think the reader of the comments and whatnot will get more out of what I'm saying than what the troll is saying. So there's that.
Knowing that we're all engaging in a public space, I'm pretty sure that most people, including you, Amy, I would say, when you engage with someone who's trolling you, or just simply giving you a hard time, or maybe just flat out being offensive, and as we covered earlier, where our egos go into defense mode because we've been insulted in public, that by responding to these people, we know full well that our response will be seen by the rest of the general public.
Yes.
So we may not be. It's almost like engaging in a debate, debate, or even like a formal debate. In any formal debate, the debaters never intend to actually change the mind of their interlocutor. It's always about engaging the mind of the listening public.
Exactly. I will say that I actually do seriously enjoy the
Well,
troll.
if you enjoy it, then have fun. You do you, man.
Daniel, you brought up a really interesting point just a few minutes ago now, where you were saying that a lot of these bizarre out there conspiracy theories, like the Tartaria thing, flat Earth, and what have you, that they're there to demoralize people. I think that's a really great point, man. Honestly, I agree with that because I myself have been demoralized slightly by some of these more out there conspiracy theories, and to see them get traction with large numbers of people is, it is demoralizing. I think you're right. That is the point.
But it's not just demoralizing for you, the person who sees people fall for that conspiracy, that ridiculous conspiracy theory. It's demoralizing for the people who fall for it as well. And it's basically, I see it as a huge distraction from our reality. And these are tangents that we can go down, which prevent us from actually focusing on the reality of what's happening now. And
I have to agree with that, definitely. I'm
So
certain that flat Earth is a distraction to keep us arguing back and forth, and I think there are people paid on both sides of that to keep it going. I
100%.
don't think it would be a thing at this point if there weren't people saying the Earth is flat. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Back and forth, on and on ad infinitum.
yeah,
In
and meanwhile, we keep electing politicians who we know are
Oh,
corruptocrats.
wait a minute. We don't elect them. Understand this. Our governments are corporations, and there isn't a corporation on this planet that will say, hey, let's just let Joe Public choose our officers. Not a one. But they
Well, we
will,
could,
they maintain the illusion that we have any say. Meanwhile, they just put in who they want to do their bidding. So don't blame us, except for the fact that we're not realizing that, hey, we aren't involved in this.
Well, the thing is, the way that I see how they do it is they'll, like Alex Jones will use elements of truth and then go completely sideways. When it comes to the flat Earth, they'll use elements of truth where NASA has done some sketchy things in the past. With the Tartaria thing, there are elements of truth that at some point in ancient history there was a worldwide civilization, or at least a collective of civilizations that had contact with each other. But then they'll go in a completely crazy direction. So I think that they have to use some elements of truth in order to string along the easily manipulated people that we have here online.
yeah, as a rule of thumb, what I use to guide me is those those ideas that seem to be stomped on immediately and not taken up by anybody and most quickly ridiculed tend to be the ones that I look at more closely. And Gandalf, you're right. There was at some point there was a global civilization that sailed the seas and the world was connected. There are linguistic proofs of this.
Well, Dan,
Wow.
are you from Australia?
Yeah, I'm in Australia.
Do you know that the oldest remnants of human beings in the Americas dates to around 50,000 years? Now, this isn't some kind of obscure YouTube video. This is actual documented, like there's skull fragments. There's actually an intact skull of the first human that came to the Americas, and it was over 50,000 years ago, and the remains were found in northeastern Brazil. south of the Amazon rainforest. Brazil's not a complete Amazon; it's not all jungle. The southern areas of the country are actually savanna and more temperate regions. But up in the savanna was actually discovered a human skull that's actually been facially reconstructed. And it dates, carbon dated, it's dated to 50,000 years ago. And would you believe uh, the race of the person that was discovered was an Australian Aboriginal?
Yeah, I totally believe that. I get that. There is connections with the Pacific Northwest. There's the DNA that we're told, and there are companies that will uh, do testing and they won't corrupt them. But they have found that Australian Aboriginal DNA, or the haplogroup, did go to the Americas as well as come to Australia, and it probably happened at about the same time they suspect. But it was just like 3 months ago that they dated a skull that they'd found, a Homo erectus, Homo sapiens skull that they'd found in Greece. They were able to date it back to 200,000 years. Now, we're told that this present wave of humanity, Homo sapiens, came out of Africa 80,000 years ago. So when you've got when you've got a skull in Europe that's 200,000 years, it kind of turns that theory on its head. That we're going back a long way now. I think we're going back so far that the mists of time kind of prevent us from making any real sense of it. But we do have, there is evidence that before the Europeans crossed the Atlantic, before the Romans, uh, that Egyptians reached New Zealand. Okay, there's very strong evidence that an Egyptian flotilla reached New Zealand. And the way we know this is because there are written records that such an expedition was sent out, and there are it's a species of rat that found its way to New Zealand before it went to anywhere else in the Pacific, and it comes from Indonesia. And so they can basically track that this fleet apparently made its way to, say, Chile, and decided that they couldn't get around or whatever, and then they turned around, came back, and settled in Hawaii. And uh, there is a YouTube channel, and it's Gabby Plum. She's made a series of videos on the origins of the New Zealanders, the Maori people. And the Maori people, we're told, arrived from Polynesia about 800 years ago in New Zealand. But
Which was only 500 years before the British.
Sorry?
Which was only around 500 years before the British first arrived.
That's right. So, but in making that the official timeline, it excludes anything before it. Now, she will prove to us in her videos that they found mittens that are beneath volcanic layers that occurred 2,000 years ago. People were living in New Zealand for thousands of years. And the Maori people themselves have oral traditions, which were recorded, have been recorded, but always hidden, that there were people living in New Zealand before they arrived, and they were white people. And there were Celts in New Zealand before.
That's really interesting because I've heard similar stories that come out of Hawaii of when the Polynesians first arrived, they claimed that there were white people that were the people that built the stone monuments that you can find in Hawaii. And
Yeah.
They even claimed there was another more stunted pygmy type people that also lived in Hawaii at the time. Ancient history is really fascinating because before, I'd say 20 years ago, there really was no substantiated evidence that could 100% be like the smoking gun that more sophisticated humans existed in the ancient past than the mainline archaeologists were willing to admit. Because if you were to open up a history textbook, I got a few of them that date back to the mid 80s, and they always would claim that the earliest types of sophisticated humans came out of Sumeria in around 4 or 5,000 BC at the latest. But once Göbekli Tepe was discovered, that kind of blew the entire narrative that humans weren't sophisticated around 12,000 years ago, the exact same time that Plato claims and Solon claimed that Atlantis existed.
Yep.
So there used to be no proof. There was no proof that humans were sophisticated in the ancient past. It was all just a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists talking about. And even saying this now, I'm certain people don't listening, maybe would watch this in 5 years, would have no idea what exactly Pepe is, and they would just go, "Oh no, that doesn't exist because that's not what I was taught in school back in the 1930s or 20s or the 1980s. People weren't taught this stuff."
Gobekli Tepe is like a gift for us because they cannot hide the fact that that thing was that built at around 10,000 BC. And you look at the sophistication and the effort that went into building that was not built by groups of hunter-gatherers. That was built by sophisticated people who had resources and had structure and control. And they were able to work that stone, move that stone, and then for some reason they buried it under rubble. And thank God they did, because had they not done that, that site may have been destroyed. It may have been located by the church and then hidden from us. But we got very lucky,
Well,
and somebody.
that's a great point. Like, look what happened to the aqueducts that the Romans built 1800 years ago. The Romans built these amazing aqueducts that stretched all over Europe, and around 80 to 90% of them were completely dismantled brick by brick to build shanty houses and to build castle walls. So no way in hell Göbekli Tepe, even a piece of it, would still be intact 12,000 years later if they didn't bury it. So it's like manna from heaven that any of it still exists.
So this makes you think now, doesn't it? Someone had the foresight to bury that thing for us.
I disagree.
Me and Bruce have already talked about this, but
I'm of the opinion that it was not buried on purpose.
oh, I'm convinced it was. I
Yeah,
think
I am too.
I tend to be behind Aaron Rufus's.
I can't.
what
Okay, first of all, I can't imagine why they would do it, and second of all, think of the logistics of actually covering up the entire city, and why would they do it? And in order to complete a construction project of that nature, even though you're just gathering rubble and walking over with your basket of rocks and dirt and dumping it and going back for another one, you have to live somewhere while you do it. So what were they living? They had this whole city made of stone and structures and their houses, and what they what lived out in under the stars while they completed this weeks or months or possibly years long construction project to bury it, and they had to live somewhere while they did it. So I mean, the logistics of doing it baffles my
How is
mind.
that? How is that incongruent with the fact that they built the place? They built it in the first place. The actual construction of Göbekli Tepe as an archaeological site. They have found no evidence that people were living there, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
well, of course. Well, you got to think about it like this. Stonehenge is a very similar type structure. And it was only about 5 or 10 years ago, I think 5 years ago, that they actually discovered the remains of a village that was not even too far away. Now you got to think, like, this is my reasoning. How much of our civilization would really be left in 10,000 years? Like, you see these monuments that we erect in the center of our towns, kind of near courthouses. That would probably survive. Some of these structures, these stone monuments, like these obelisks that we erect, that would probably survive. But I,
Most of our cities would literally rot and corrode and disappear.
yeah, within
Certain elements of our cities, like glass, would stick around, so there would be tons and tons of glass to be found. That would be one thing.
but when it comes to Göbekli Tepe, I'm convinced that probably 90% of what was around that area was made out of what we still, over 12,000 years, build out of, which is wood, which could rot away theoretically in 20, 30 years.
Sure.
So there was probably large villages, mud brick houses. I'm not saying the people that built Göbekli Tepe were extremely, extremely sophisticated. I think that they were really intelligent. They were probably just as smart as we are. So they probably built with wood, and they had some type of foresight. We have no idea what was coming. It could have been, strange weather patterns started occurring and they had some kind of foresight to bury the structure. There could have been rumors of some giant army moving from God knows where to burn and take down their civilization.
Yeah, they could have. That's right. There could have been religious a shift in religious thought, and there could have been. Yeah, I don't know, but I'm wondering, Rufus, how do you think it was? If it was natural, if that naturally happened, how did that happen without destroying the entire site? How did all of those rocks land on that site without completely demolishing the site? Because they are unearthing these rocks and they're still standing. Many of them. Some of them are.
Well, when you say they're still standing, you're talking about the megalithic T-shaped structures.
And
The
so what natural disaster happened that piled all of these rocks on top of this site? How did that possibly happen? How could that happen? I mean, I can understand an earthquake, but this thing is on the top of a hill. Tepe means hill.
Mhm.
This this whole site is on the top of a hill.
Well,
What
wait a minute.
fell
Hang
on
on.
top of it?
I know that they say tepe means hill, and they mean Göbekli Tepe means pot-bellied hill. Is that's in Turkey? Is that right? That site Göbekli Tepe it's in Turkey. Is that right?
Yeah, it's very close to Syria.
Okay.
That's it.
So
Yeah.
so when they say Göbekli Tepe means pot-bellied hill, are we talking the Turkish language, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, because tepe in Egyptian means age, right? So the Zep Tepe in Egypt means the golden age.
Yeah, it's not in Egypt.
No, okay, I'm just noticing the similarity in the wording. Um, eh, this is my personal theory, and call it crazy, call it conspiracy, whatever.
I'm sure you got a few of my ideas that you'll call that.
Me too.
Oh, by the way, Gandalf, Richard Serrett, he uploaded another short clip of a reverse speech of the Patterson um, interview. So
What's the conclusion?
I haven't watched it yet. I just noticed it in my subscription feed, and I just want to throw that at you in case you want to go check it out. And I know you know who Richard Serrett is, so
Oh yeah, man, I'll check that out.
so all right, Daniel, are you at all familiar with the Thunderbolts project, the work of Emmanuel Velikovsky at all?
I might be. I can't recall.
Okay,
Bring me up to speed.
I'll be as brief as possible. It's this idea that these planets were much closer to Earth. Venus and Mars had a close encounter. There was an enormous electrical discharge, and through this massive, massive lightning bolt between these two planets when their close encounter occurred, that there was what we call electrical machining of the planet's surface of both planets. So uh, once that happened, all that material was ejected into space and literally rained down on Earth. Think of the biblical fire and brimstone story. So that that it's just a hypothesis of mine, because quite literally, I'm a logistics man. My brain thinks very conclusively in terms of logistics. As a contractor, I'm always thinking about how to complete a project from start to finish. What tools am I going to need? What am I going to need to do? What's going to be in my way? How do I overcome this? Um, Solving all kinds of problems in a logistical sense. So when I think of Göbekli Tepe, and they tell me that it was buried on purpose, considering the massive scale and size of the site. And by the way, have you heard they found a sister city? I mean, I just heard this like today or yesterday.
There's dozens of structures in that area.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Well,
What
not
my
just dozens of structures. That I think, that, if I'm not mistaken, they found a sister city.
Well, Roof, my reasoning behind why they would bury Göbekli Tepe is simple. Logically thinking, if our civilization had some kind of knowledge that something bad was going to go down, we would probably lose everything. We were going to be knocked back to the pre-Stone Age, which I'm imagining the people who constructed Göbekli Tepe had the idea of. What would we try and preserve, and how would we try and preserve it? I imagine some of the most famous structures that we could preserve would be, well, this is a bad example in modern times considering what happened this year, but I imagine one of the main things we would try and preserve, for example, would be the Notre Dame Cathedral. And we would probably cover that fucker in sand and dirt so that it would survive the cataclysm that was coming. 10,000 years later, all of Paris is gone. They dig out the sand that is covering Notre Dame, and they would go, wow, why the fuck did these people cover this thing up? I think that Göbekli Tepe was extremely important to these people. It had some kind of significance that we can't probably even comprehend, but it was probably some type of religious significance. You know what I mean?
I,
extremely precious. If
I
they,
can see that. I can see that.
yeah, that makes sense to me too. That actually does make sense. But it must have been very precious, and yes, they must have had some knowledge or forewarning that something was going to happen. But you can always argue that such knowledge would have you focusing on getting yourself underground or safe, and
That's
your
right.
livestock, and you wouldn't spend months or years burying unless you had a lot of warning. And I can't imagine how things we can't imagine about our prehistory.
Yeah, well, we'll never probably know exactly what went down, but Göbekli Tepe, I think, is probably the most significant archaeological find of the past 3 or 4 or 5 centuries. I think it's more significant than Troy. I think it's the most significant archaeological discovery probably in human history, more significant than even the pyramids.
I
And
think so. I think you're right. It calls into question the official timeline of when we started farming,
yeah,
because there must have been farms, okay? And but there was a city. They found a city 7,000 BC in Israel, and they didn't know how old it was. It was there for a long time, and then they wanted to build over it. I don't know the name of it, but it was recently uncovered, and it's a walled city, and it probably had 10,000 people in it or more. And this thing is dated back 7,000 BC, which takes us to 9,000 years ago in
where was the city located?
Israel.
Israel. Okay, I believe it.
Look, I'll give you the details later because all I need to do is go back to my history, and I will find and the video that brought it to my attention, and then I'll be able to send you links to the.
Well, I remember going to the Royal Ontario Museum back when I was a teenager, and I was fascinated by an exhibit that they were displaying there at the time, which was of a walled city that existed in modern Ukraine, and it dated to 5000 BC. So that's exactly the same time as this city. So this city actually existed in Ukraine. Even according to established archaeology, it really did exist in modern Ukraine. This is thousands of years before the Scythians even existed.
Yeah.
And
I-
they
I-
they went from cities to back to a nomadic lifestyle, which is fascinating.
Well, there's Dark Ages, there's this constant cycle that we've come across in history where we reach a peak in civilization and then some climate change or natural disaster or it's usually climate change. So one group of people have to go on the offensive to survive, and they'll bring down other civilizations. When they did it, the the boat, well, the sea people who brought down the Egypt. They brought down Egypt, Assyria. I think Assyria may have survived, but the Hittites,
Yeah,
Greeks,
the Sea People are an unknown group of people that came out of nobody even knows to this day where they came from. They took out the Mycenaeans, they took out the Hittites, the Mitanni Empire that was in northern Iraq, uh,
and
and
the Egyptian.
well, the only civilization that actually survived was the Egyptians because
Well, the only civilization that recovered was the
they,
Egyptians with
they
a knowledge of their history.
yeah, they defeated the Sea People on, I think it was like in the rivers of Egypt. So they actually went at them in with their own game. Most of the other empires were trying to fight them on land because you'd think Sea Peoples, okay, they're going to be bad on land, so let's fight them on land. But no, the Egyptians defeated them luckily, and they scattered. But that's a great point. How many different dark ages has there been? Like, I think that initiated what in Greek history was known as the Greek Dark Age, where from the Mycenaeans and the era of Troy and early Sparta and Agamemnon, there was this giant dark age that happened in Greece where it was only hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years later that we got what people, when they think about ancient Greece, we refer to as like the time of like Aristotle and all that. But that was like a recovery after 500 years from the dark ages that came.
Yeah, and they were different. They were different people who spoke a different language. We understand linear A, but we can't make any sense out of the linear B. And it's written in the same style, but it's a different language. And we know that that was the language they were using for the Trojan War. Okay, and this is where Max drives me nuts. He's bringing that attack on Troy up to recent history. He's saying it's all part of the same war. All these great battles in history happened at around the same time, and I'm like smacking my head listening to him because I know he's an intelligent person. But Eric Schliemann found the city of Troy, and initially it may not have been the Troy that was written about in the Iliad, but um, they kept digging and they found Troy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They kept building the city on top, and they finally found at the bottom the Troy that was sacked and burned, and it was huge, and it was part of a civilization in the Near East that existed, and the time is 1100 BC. So perfect timing. And so Homer's stories, whoever Homer was, whether he was one man or many, his stories on that Trojan War turned out to be more than myth. And
It's
many
crazy.
of the mythologies are turning out that there is archaeological evidence to support, in one way or another, most of the myths and legends that we have that have been dismissed by science and history for so long. And the fact that there was a seafaring global civilization and a common language. Is indisputable that the Magyar language, it was a root language for the Australian Aborigines.
Hmm.
It was a root language for the Aztecs. It was a root language for uh, other Polynesian languages, uh, Japanese, and maybe Korean.
Well, according to the official narrative, when it comes to I always call them the Magyars, was they came out from the east, so it's theoretical that they could have had some kind of root language that dates back to that connects all the Asian languages, similar to the Indo-European language that stretches from Scotland all the way to India.
Well, it was a Hungarian, Attila Flink, who discovered that it wasn't so great on the mainland of Australia, but he went to Tasmania, and their language had pretty much just evolved from what it was in the beginning without outside influence. And he discovered that he could communicate with the Tasmanian Aborigines using Hungarian, and that many, many words, sentence structures were the same. And other work has been done since with other languages around the world, and they've found that this connection exists. And this is where our civilization sort of points back towards the Black Sea. And maybe the flood, the flood story, of the Abrahamic religions and the Sumerians, maybe that flood was the Black Sea filling up full of water,
Yeah,
as
it's quite possible.
age ended. Yeah, and so because Hungary is on the Black Sea, and these people had a civilization, and when civilization collapses, and we know this from when Rome fell, we have a dark age, and people go on the move. But climate change does this too. So the Sahara was lush and green, and they're only admitting this now that it was lush and green. 5,000 years ago, there were lakes in the Sahara and all across Central Europe. And I think it was Central Europe was where there was a civilization which had spread out, and they were forced to go on the move because of climate change. And they ultimately pushed into Europe as we know it, the peninsula of Western Asia that is called Europe. They were moved into that area, forcing all the people in front of them down into Southern Europe, which ultimately brought down the Roman Empire. In the beginning, it made it strong because they had to defend it. And they had their initial expansion. They threw down on the Carthaginians for their right to travel the Mediterranean, and they won that battle. And they did it out of pure ingenuity, having apparently never been sailors before, were able to build a fleet.
Well, isn't
The
it fascinating?
Carthaginians have it destroyed and then rebuild another one to beat them.
Yeah, well, isn't it fascinating how, how powerful was the Roman Republic like back during the days of like Marius, right? They were able, the barbarian invasions that were started and triggered by the Huns coming in from the east that pushed over all the barbarian tribes into Roman territory. If that was something that happened during the time of Marius, so during the late Republic, oh my God, they would have kicked the Franks' ass. They would have kicked the Goths' ass. They would have kicked the Alemanni's ass. They would have gone to town and wiped out, decimated these barbarian tribes that eventually were able to overthrow the Roman Empire, or at least in the West, right? Because back in the day, the Romans would go 50,000 against 80 or 90,000 Cimbrian German barbarians. They would take on 10,000 men would take on 250,000 British Celtic warriors, you know.
Yeah, and win.
Oh yeah, and they slaughtered Queen Boudica's army. They slaughtered the Cimbri, like, but then hundreds of years pass, societies change, culture changes, and they were completely obliterated by 10,000 Goths.
Their birth rate declined dramatically. Men started dressing up like women, and basically the same things that are happening to our society now were all beginning to happen in the late Roman Empire, and
Yeah,
the birth rate of the Germans was uh, what way higher than the birth rate of the Latins, so there was more of them, and then they started to um, contract them as their armies and bring them into Rome, and then they were demanding more and more, rights, and before they knew it, they were overrun by a civilization that itself was forced out of its homeland by a civilization that was moving from the east. So how many times this has happened, we'll never know. But I wonder, what do you guys think? Where did the Romans come from? I had a theory on this. I don't know how
They were
well it held up under scrutiny, but where do you think the Romans came from?
weren't they they came from the Etruscan?
that's like according to the Aeneid, which was basically just propaganda created for the emperor or first citizen Augustus or Octavian.
Yeah,
I
basically.
I have no idea. To be
I,
But
quite
the
honest.
I think the Latins were or the city of Rome was kind of similar to what they said it was in the early days, like the propaganda that the city of Rome was founded by the Trojans was, I think, just kind of made up. In the early days, the Romans actually recorded that basically the city of Rome was just a collection of villages established by, random poor people that had nowhere to
outlaws,
go.
they were outlaws and they were all men. This is the story.
Yeah, yeah,
All men. And then they invited a neighboring town to come have a party
the
and
Sabine tribe.
stole all their women. And but then when their neighbors got organized to come and steal the women or come and retrieve their women had fallen in love with their new husbands, and they stopped the fight and said, no, we want to stay. We'll be Romans now. I mean, this is what the Romans say of their own history, that the Aeneid, um, there may be a little bit of truth, but I don't think they came from Troy. I think linguistically, Latin is very closely related to Greek, the Greek that was spoken by the Spartans. And now we're told that the Romans were very enamorous of, they were Grecophiles, and that at some point they ended up, the elite of Rome were speaking Greek to each other and writing everything down in Greek. And none of this makes sense to me. What makes more sense is that a group of people moved out of the Peloponnesus into, and we know that the Greeks were colonizing all of the Mediterranean, as were the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were doing it in a less, um, uh, they were not as organized, whereas the Greeks were more so organized, even though they fought each other a lot. They were building settlements, all around especially the northern Mediterranean and the Black Sea. And I do not see why the Romans seem to appear as the Etruscans and the Greeks blended in around Rome. And I think that the Romans were basically the hybrid vigor of Etruscan civilization and Greek civilization coming together, and with a new, agenda, basically. involved, and they started out with the Republic, and
Well,
it,
they were probably influenced. I would say that's probably true to an extent where they were influenced probably by the Greeks and the Etruscans. You
how
know,
many Roman kings in the beginning were actually Etruscans? And they
all of the early kings were Etruscan nobility.
yeah. So but then the population that was moving into the area had enough of this. They didn't want
Well,
to be
the
ruled
fact
over by kings.
are you familiar with the story that triggered the formation of the Roman Republic from where they were, servile to the Etruscans, and they had a local Etruscan nobility family that actually ruled over them, the Tarquin family. And the story of how the Roman Republic was founded is really fascinating if you like look into it. Basically, I won't waste your guys' time, but more or less what happened was there was the prince of the city, his father, the king. He was a real ladies' man that used to really kind of seduce and hit on a lot of women in the city. And what happened was there was one woman in the city that would always brush off his advances. And her husband had to go off to war one day to fight a neighboring tribe that was pestering like the farmlands that Rome controlled. And this kind of spoiled brat actually went to the woman whose name was Lucretia, and he, while the husband was gone, raped her. And the husband came back, and he found this was like a few days later. The husband came back and found out that his wife had committed suicide. And Lucretia committed suicide because there was so much shame. She was like the perfect, if you were like in the alt right, she was like the perfect waifu, noble woman who would never sleep around with another guy. And she killed herself because she didn't want to bear the shame of telling her husband, Brutus, that she was raped by another man and by the prince of the city, no less. So once Brutus came back and found this out, he was in a rage, and because she was a very well known woman, how great she was, blah blah blah, the city went wild, and they chased the Tarquin dynasty out of Rome over to Veii, where they kind of hid out, and that's where the Roman Republic was founded. It was founded over a noble woman being raped, and the husband and the populace of Rome freaking out to defend her honor. They wanted to murder the Tarquins.
Yep, I have heard that story, but you just crystallized it. I do believe that something like that probably did happen. And then the Republic was formed because they had enough of kings. But it wasn't long before they went back to having kings. And it was out of necessity. And we all know the story of Julius Caesar. He was forced to do what he had to do to survive, and ended up making himself lifetime consul of Rome or whatever. But it was after Caesar um, that came Augustus, and he was such a great emperor that population. It was like they reverted back, or the numbers got to a point where they were able to impose their will, and it's very Spartan. In my um, studies of history, the Romans are very closely related to the Spartans in the Empire of Rome, even down to the red cloaks that they were wearing, and the military um, uh, organization which gave them the ability to create an empire. That discipline seemed to have come from Sparta, and I have a feeling that that is where Rome, as we know it, came from. It was
Well,
basically an infusion of the Spartan or Peloponnesian discipline and people and language with the Etruscans.
You ever seen the movie 300?
Yeah,
You remember the part in the movie where Leonidas says something about the Athenians, and he says they're a bunch of boy lovers. Do you do you remember that part of 300 that he where Leonidas calls the Athenians boy lovers?
yeah, but Leonid, the Spartans were the biggest boy lovers of them all.
Oh my God! So you know, okay,
Yeah,
yeah, the entire Spartan society was based around man love. Like men were, you know, they would raise up a young 13-year-old boy and they would teach them everything they know, and they would also bang them in the ass.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that was,
It's pederasty.
yeah. And if you look, but the thing is, if you look, and actually the entire Spartan race, the Dorian race of Spartans that ruled over the local population there, uh, the Helot slaves that had to serve the Spartans, eventually became so numerous, the majority of the Spartan armies were made up of servile Helot slaves that were promised their freedom if they were to fight for the Spartan armies, because the the Spartan population and birth rate completely plummeted in the 400s, and that's when Athens started to overtake Sparta finally. But early Rome actually, like I just don't see that they could be related, because the early Romans, back during the time of the kings and the early republic, they hated the Etruscans because they saw them as vile, corrupted people that would drink wine at parties with their wife, and they hated homosexuality. And the Spartans are the complete opposite. The Spartans were probably the gayest civilization that ever existed. But I'll
Yeah,
be
well, we have that the Greek people treated their women very poorly, and Etruscans treated their women equally. This is from what we understand from what we know of history.
here, guys. I'll be right back.
You're right. The the art that we get from e- early the early Etruscans, they their women were up there with the men. Okay, and but it's just I can see like the people who would have left Greece too. Maybe they left for different reasons, but maybe they disagreed with the way society was going, and this happens all the time. I mean, you get the Mormons detach themselves from the rest of America because of things that they believed in. So, maybe a group of people or groups of people were leaving the Peloponnesus because, they got sick of having to have sex with boys instead of women, and maybe women went with them because they were sick of being kept at home. And but a lot of that came back into like, it was not there in the early republic, but when the empire was happening, pederasty returned in with vengeance, and the role of women was pretty much reduced to the role of a housewife again. And it, language-wise, um, what I understand of the Etruscan language, and I don't know this myself, but from people who I trust who speak Slavic, tell me that the Etruscan language, because it was written in basically Greek, they wrote it in Greek, and they got all these Etruscan carvings in Greek writing, and they can read them, make sense out of them um, in Slavic. And so the Etruscans, I believe, were, maybe more Slavic than Latin. They were definitely absorbed by Rome. So, and you get this when two peoples come together you get this, it's called hybrid vigor. And there's this initial enthusiasm that um, creates a great people, at least in the beginning. They do amazing things. And the discipline of the Romans, I, I, I just can't see how it manifests itself without some prior direction. And the only place in anywhere near Rome, which is basically just across the water, and we're not talking very far, is the Peloponnesus and the Spartans. So maybe, I don't know, I think the Latin is a fusion of basically a bastardized form of Greek fusing with a Slavic language. And that's how it looks to me. And I don't know all Greek and I don't know any Slavic, but the people who I know who do know Latin and Slavic and Greek tell me this. And so that's where I get this theory that the Romans were Greeks, and well, a good part of them were, and there were Greek settlements all over the Mediterranean, but they were insular. And I think Rome was different. It it absorbed the people around it, didn't push them out or hold them out. And in doing so, they, without knowing it perhaps, um, create the foundation for this new people who kept absorbing new peoples. And they just kept going and going and going until they had the largest empire the world had ever seen. And
I agree with you. I think the Romans were definitely Greekophiles. You can see it in the language. We can see it in their architecture. We can see it in their laws. And I was going to say this, but Church of Entropy said it in the chat before I could say it to you, that there is a crossover between the gods. They're almost identical in the attributes of the gods. They attributed god status to the same planets, the same attributes to the same gods. And so there's no doubt all of the mythologies that created the precursor or the proto religions were all based on these mythologies of these planetary gods. The Romans
yeah,
were without a doubt Greekophiles.
so the Greeks were in the beginning, the Greeks were contesting with the Phoenicians for control of the Mediterranean. And in the end, it was the Romans who won that battle. And the Phoenicians sort of faded into history. And if you believe Martin Liebke, the flat earth British, then they sort of became a black nobility and then went sneakily about taking back control of Europe and doing sneaky things. But it's fascinating the the origins of European history, and for us to be demoralized over it. I mean, the Vikings alone. I mean, where did they come from? And their technology, their boat building technology, was not unique to them. I mean, we're told it was, but it wasn't. They have found um, very similar stuff that goes back to 2,000 years or 2,500 years, 3,000 years ago, that the Celtic people were using to cross the British Channel. And uh, Phoenicians, that they they could sail. And, they were like, I doubt the Phoenicians made it to the Americas, as you know, and then we know that the Vikings did. But this is not something that history is focused on. History focuses on Columbus, an Italian paid by the Spanish to go and find India the other way. And if you believe the story, Columbus believed, and up until the day he died, that he had found Asia. And there was another Italian who was apparently the first to set foot on mainland America, gave it the name. Is it Amerigo? Vespucian America?
Amerigo Vespucci.
There you are. Yes. Good on you.
See, we keep Amy around for a reason.
Yep, I'm here for a reason.
You're a wealth of knowledge.
She fills in just in time.
You're our Google on demand.
Oh dear, oh dear. I'm the duck duck go on command.
But before the Romans, there was clearly civilization in Europe, and Gandalf's mentioned this before. Walled cities in, where was it? In was it Bulgaria?
I think he said, hold on, my ducking isn't doing well right now.
Oh, you're searching. Okay, you're not pulling this off the top of your head now.
No, I'm trying to pull it off the top of my head and it isn't coming.
Well,
Yeah,
you've got to know something if you want to.
Sorry, Ukraine.
Ukraine, that's it.
Yeah, the Ukraine. This is so basically, this is where I mean, Alex Jones was telling his audience that Russia began in the Crimea and the Ukraine, and this simply isn't true. That there were, and we call them Tartars. This Tartarian civilization, which has been blown out of proportion, were living in the Ukraine, and they had cities, and they farmed, and they were there a long time before the Swedes came down and took control and created what we know as Russia. But Russia began in Moscow, and two cities either side of it joined forces, and then it was they had to defeat the Tartarians, who were a mixture of different nomadic hordes that roamed the steppes and farmed the steppes of Eastern Europe. And it was in that coming together to do that that created the Russian people, the Russian language, and the Russian culture. It had nothing to do with Ukraine. It was beating Ukraine. And which is why when Alex says, I must have read 300 history books or whatever, I'm like, that's too many, because you've filled your brain up with so much contradicting stuff that now it's making up its own. And this is something I firmly believe, is that rather than reading everything, just reread the best. Find the best. So maybe 24 good history books in Europe and read them over and over and over again. I know I don't have a terrible memory, but neither do I have a photographic memory. And I'll read a book and I won't be able to remember, 90% of it off the top of my head. But if I read it over and over and over again, that things begin to stick. And one of the series I really like, and anyone who watches the video and is interested in the history of civilization needs to go and look at Will Durant, his The Story of Civilization. It's an 11-volume series that begins with Egypt, Sumeria, Indus Valley, and our Asian heritage, and then goes up through Western civilization. And I have read through that series maybe 3 times. I'm going at it again for a 4th. I don't read it in order. The only one that I haven't read through completely is his on the, and I really should, but it's the Renaissance. But he does cover the time period in the books either side. He covers that time period. He just doesn't focus on the Renaissance. And in one specific book, he focuses on the Renaissance. And there's too much information in there for me right now and I have a lack of interest in the Renaissance, in learning more about it, as compared to our origins in civilization and the civilization and the philosophy of Europe. And when I say philosophy, I mean theological philosophy as well, and the interplay of forces like Voltaire and that misanthropic genius, the dean of St. Patrick's, who had a recipe for cooking children. He wrote Gulliver's Travels. Jonathan Swift, Urukagina, or Erugina, depending on which book you read, the Irish philosopher, um, the, the, the missing time that we have in Britain, where we're still arguing about whether there was a Saxon invasion or migration. It's pretty clear that the language replaced whatever language was in Britain at the time, was replaced by the Anglo-Saxon language. So I tend to either they were severely outnumbered to the point where they had to take on the language of the people who came, or they were beaten into submission. And the evidence sort of shows that they were kind of beaten into submission because there was waves of refugees pouring into Wales and Ireland at the time of, and the Irish, the Scots were forced out of Ireland into Scotland by the wave of people that was crossing the Irish Channel to escape this Saxon, Anglo-Saxon Jew invasion from mainland Europe. So, and then that sort of began that phase of history, which has led us to where we are today, which is this Anglo-American world that we live in, which is being challenged by China. And this sort of brings us full circle to the social engineering that's going on that is trying to demoralize Western civilization into believing that it deserves replacing. And I think the flat Earth and the mud flood history and a score of other things are being used as tools to, and they're just a part of the whole, to demoralize. I mean, feminism had pretty much accomplished everything it needed to by the 90s. In my opinion, I think that women were being seen as an equal to a man in every way, professionally, but not physically. And men and women are two separate parts of one species. Uh,
Speaking of that, I just recently watched a video that was discussing Ms. Monopoly, where if you're a female player, you get like $240 for passing go. But if you're a male player, you get whatever the standard is.
200.
I think it might have been. Anyway, you get more money for passing go if you're a female.
Right.
And I'm like, what? Because they're saying, oh, women are so oppressed in our society. We decided to make a game that gives them the advantage instead of the men. And it's like, wait a minute. What?
Look, I'm glad you can see that, Amy, but you can see where this has gone, where feminism has gone way past the point of, you know, suffrage to equality in, and now there are women making YouTube videos demanding that all males be exterminated.
Yes.
And because men are responsible for all the world's problems, and the patriarchy is basically just a cancer on society that has
The evil.
caused everything evil to happen. And we know that this is, it's like an artificial, it's being imposed upon us.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
glad
By
you I'm
In the
glad you
90s.
guys brought it back to this, because one of the videos that I wanted to share was and I'm glad you brought up the what is it, Miss Monopoly thing. That's
Monopoly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I saw that going around too. And it's funny because some people were wondering if Hasbro was just trolling us, and they have on occasion created various aspects of Monopoly literally for that purpose, just for fun. Um, and they were actually contacted, and they said, no, this is actually not. This is a serious endeavor. And socially, what this does is, by putting women at an advantage in this, let's be honest, it's just a board game. But by putting women at the advantage at the start of the game and throughout the game, you're not actually empowering women, because psychologically, in the mind of the player, if you're a woman, you're not going to feel, you're not going to, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not going to feel as proud, if you win the game or whatever, or if you're doing well in the game. You're not going to feel as proud of yourself, because basically you haven't really earned it through merit.
Yes. Exactly. You've been given a bonus that is strictly based on the fact that you happen to have a certain physical configuration, which, okay, yeah, I agree.
So there's this other video that I wanted to share about I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's from this freaking YouTube channel called Now This News Network, where and it's just an opinion piece that they're putting out. And you should see the comments, by the way. That's what I was laughing at earlier, Amy, when I was talking to you, right, like on the pre-show. Um, okay, so you said that you can't hear, and you don't like the way I have been screen sharing, because you can't hear it in the Hangout, and you have to go to my channel and all that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a screen share now on the Hangouts, and then I'm going to go and share this video. And I would like you guys' opinion, particularly Daniel's opinion. This has to do with social engineering. Um, where did it go? I just had it right here. Where did it go? I lost my tab. Oh, here it is. It is this one. I didn't recognize it. Okay, this is from the Now This News. Hopefully, you guys can see it on the live on my channel. Now This News. Why you should stop saying "Hey guys." Okay, so Amy, let me know. Go ahead and speak up during the video if you can hear this. I'm going to play portions, and I'll pause during as we go. It's only 4.5 minutes, but I'll pause occasionally, and we can comment on what's being promoted here in terms of social engineering and the fourth wave or third wave feminism, or whatever that is. So here we go.
Hey guys, welcome back to Now This. Guys is a simple term. It could mean
Amy, can you hear that? I don't hear anything from.
No, sorry, I was muted. No, I can't hear anything, so I will have to go to your channel to
Well,
hear.
actually, there's subtitles on the bottom, so I'll just go full screen. And if you want to just read as we go here, it's pretty damn ridiculous. Anyway, check this out.
Hey guys, welcome back to Now This. Guys is a simple term. It could mean boys, or if you're modern, hip, it means people. At first glance, guys seems inviting, friendly, maybe warm, even comedic at times. But it, like many male default terms, should not be normalized as an all-encompassing phrase,
brother.
innocent as it may seem. While we may understand the word means no real harm, with a deeper look, you'll understand that we've been ignoring the cognitive impact on women as well as gender non-conforming folks.
All right. I have issue with almost every single thing that comes out of this woman's mouth.
Yes.
But you know, in lieu of getting through this without taking an entire hour
Here we go. I can see some.
do you want me to start over, Daniel? You're yeah. Oh, Daniel, by the way, if you're either mute your mic or mute the live if you're on my channel watching the live video, so we
I
don't
haven't seen any of it.
so we don't get the
Yeah, I can't run
feedback.
video.
So
Okay.
either
So I can't watch it.
all right. All right, so just to prevent feedback, either mute your mic or mute the
He's got it.
mute.
He had it
Oh,
muted.
okay. All right, so I'll start over. It's only a couple of seconds. Here we go.
Hey guys, welcome back to Now This. Guys is a simple term. It could mean boys, or if you're modern, hip, it means people. At first glance, guys seems inviting, friendly, maybe warm, even comedic at times. But it, like many male default terms, should not be normalized as an all-encompassing phrase, innocent as it may seem. While we may understand the word means no real harm, with a deeper look, you'll understand that we've been ignoring the cognitive impact on women as well as gender non-conforming folks.
Okay, so I need to address this, where she says, while we may understand the word means no real harm. And yet she goes on to say, with a deeper look, you'll understand that we've been ignoring the cognitive impact on women as well as gender nonconforming folks. So I don't understand how she can make that leap when 2 seconds ago she just said, while we may understand the word means no real harm,
Yeah.
it seems like she's actually trying to make it have
Have
harm.
some real harm. Yes. Well, and it's sort of like when we talk about man and mankind. Hello, that includes women.
Sure. And before I forget, I also want to point out that on multiple occasions throughout my life, I have seen women use the term guys when referring to a whole room full of women.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
So I don't know where this chick is getting off or who wrote this fucking script or whatever. And here I go getting triggered again. I'm dropping F-bombs. But Daniel, you got something to say?
Yeah. Yeah. The cognitive impact is all hers. The only cognitive impact that the word guys is having on women is in the context in which she is putting it. So there was none, and now there is. This is linguistic. Basically, this is yeah, okay. She is creating this movement is now creating.
They're creating problems where there are none. They're making issues
That's
out
right.
of non-issues.
Yep.
Yes, the cognitive impact is on bringing this issue up in the first place. And yes, like Amy said, this is mankind. And when you say that, you don't see all men. Mankind is men and women.
It's
And
mankind refers to all humans.
that's right. And it should. And we shouldn't have to change our language to
Be
prove that we're not misogynistic.
This is
Okay.
this is very 1984-esque.
politically correct.
This goes back to the demoralization of our civilization that I was talking about, and I'm sure you've seen the drag queens doing stories with children and
Oh yeah, story time.
Oh,
yeah, rolling around on the floor with them, and I mean demonic clown creatures um, trying to brainwash children into seeing gender differently to the way they would naturally see it. Now, like I was saying before, at least here in Australia, in the 90s, we were right at the end of racism. We were right at the end of homophobia. We were right at the end of racism. I said that racism, misogyny. It was all ending, and people were going, right, well, clearly that is not a constructive way to run a society. So let's be inclusive, and let's not judge people upon the decisions that they make with their lives. And it has gone beyond that now. It's like this thing has been put on steroids, so to speak, and it's done to demoralize, I believe, to demoralize us. It's Winston down and shown 4 fingers and said, "How many fingers am I holding up, Winston?"
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I see 4. Okay, so eventually Winston does say, "Okay, there's 5," but that was not good. He said, "No. So the only answer was, I don't know."
Right.
Where he had to get to was, you need to see how many fingers you're holding up. And this is what they're doing to us now. There are 2 genders, and occasionally there is an intersex one with an ovary and a testicle. Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
2 genders, male, and that makes the human race. And now they're trying to tell us that there isn't 2 genders, there is however many they tell us there is.
Yes.
It's not homosexual gender, it's not intersex, it's LGBTQIP plus, and that plus could be whatever they say, and when they say it, we have to agree, and if we don't, we're homophobic misogynists who aren't human, and that's the direction in which we're heading. And all the independent thought is going out the window, because everyone is going to be conscious of what they say, and in order to do that, you must be conscious of what you think. And
I hope that people watch my video, Who's Responsible? Because in there, I point out that I am not responsible for how others choose to feel about what I say. They do have a choice. So I will say whatever I want. And if somebody doesn't like it, it's on them. And I hope.
yeah, hate speech is a weapon against all of us.
It's bogus.
Oh, she even mentions weaponizing, and I'll get to that, and hopefully we can get through this without pausing and taking an entire hour. But let me play another minute or 2 of this, and I'll pause, and we can go over it.
I'm
women.
glad that it's subtitles, because I can't hear.
Okay.
I'm
That's
reading what
probably
she
just because
says.
you're on the panel. I'm pretty sure everybody in the live can hear it, and it should be broadcasting with sound.
Yeah, it is broadcasting with sound. I checked.
Okay. All right. So I'll play some more of this.
As well as gender non-conforming
her body
folks, by
language.
only explicitly addressing the male-identifying individuals present. The meaning of guys has changed over time. According to the Washington Post, etymologists believe it began in the 17th century with a guy named Guy Fawkes.
Okay, she goes through a little bit of the history, and it has to do with people who align themselves with Guy Fawkes being called guys, blah, blah, blah. This is the boring part, so I'll skip ahead a bit here.
Guys. Eventually, according to the Boston Globe, the term broadened to describe creepy people, then to a generic term for men, and now, some would say, a gender-neutral phrase.
What do you mean some would say? It is a gender-neutral phrase. I just expressed and I just told you, and I'll be damned if there's anybody who can deny that there are women who use the term guys to refer to all their girlfriends. Walk into a room full of women and say, "Hey guys, we got to go over here. We're going to play a board game now. Hey guys, we're going to do this. Hey guys, I got alcohol."
Absolutely.
Women use it to each other. It's just a colloquial term, and this is, again, just repeating myself and repeating what Daniel said, that we're making it an issue. This person or this channel, whoever has scripted and created this video, they're making an issue out of a non-issue.
Yep.
So she says, for decades, we have a set standard of only addressing.
For decades, we have set a standard of only addressing the men in the room.
No, we haven't. We have not.
Yeah, that is not true. Ladies and gentlemen, and ladies always came first.
Oh, that's right. Good point. Ladies and gentlemen, ladies is first. That's correct.
Yep.
Of course, we claim it's colloquial, but with our elevated knowledge and inclusive perspective,
Elevated knowledge and inclusive perspective. Oh, I love where I captured her facial expression. Well, that pause. Look at that.
That's brilliant.
Classic.
Yeah. What that shows me is that she's not comfortable herself with what she's saying.
Oh,
She's actually confused herself, and,
Yeah.
and it's
She's
squashing
reading the
up
script.
as well.
good point. Good point. I was just completely ignorant of her own body language because I'm too busy focusing on two or three things. But you're absolutely right. That facial expression says it all. That she doesn't even agree with this herself. That she's disgusted by having to read what she's reading here.
She's definitely not comfortable with it. She's this is discomfort. This is she's not. This is not her. This speech that she's giving is not her mind. Someone has written it,
Yeah.
or helped her write it and told her what to say.
You know, it's really hard to know though because there are
I'll be right back.
people that genuinely believe these things. They go along with whatever establishment narrative is being pushed in whatever given week. You know,
Yeah,
the whole transsexual thing that happened maybe back in 2015, how it was like in the news out of nowhere. I forget what's his name. Bruce Jenner became a woman, and then everywhere in the news you started hearing how we need to accept trans people. There was a federally mandated law in the United States and in Canada that trans people are allowed to go to whatever bathroom they choose. But this was like a worldwide thing that spread to every Western country within the same year, that trans people are being persecuted. This is the new social movement of the year, that we need to overcome this evil, and it just will never end. I don't think that it will ever end. I think that
I'm going to tell you that the whole trans movement is entirely manufactured.
oh, of course, but
Approximately 0.0003% of the human population is trans.
yeah, but
I'm sorry.
this is the whole problem, Amy, that this is a manufactured controversy.
Yes.
There is that tiny percentile of people who are trans, but if you actually look at the numbers from 2010 to 2019, that number's exploded. I think that number is nearly 1% to 2% now of people that claim to be transsexual. And that's because there was this massive push to normalize it and to advocate for it. And people before that, it was like, okay, that person thinks they're a woman. Okay, I don't really give a damn. But then in 2015, it became very established that you have to accept this new,
and celebrate.
celebrate this new.
Celebrate it, yes.
Yeah,
But you made a good point, Gandalf. You raised a very good point about this being global. And Rufus asked me the other day, he said, why do you have such an interest in American politics? And my answer was, well, American politics is basically world politics. But really, what I'm seeing is you can tell when a directive has come down from on high, because you'll see that legislation or that movement will be happening in several different countries at the exact same time.
Yeah.
And in the exact same way. And a very good case in point here is right now, our Conservative Party, who's in charge in my state of New South Wales, has actually trying to legalise abortion right up till birth. And they're taking it out of the criminal code and making it all medical. And they want to completely decriminalise a woman who attempts to kill her own baby inside her. And they want to allow, as long as two doctors agree, that a medical impact on the woman, that they can abort that baby right up until the final week of gestation.
Yeah, and that's maybe
Exact
that's
same thing is
yeah,
happening in the United States.
in New York, yeah. Maybe
Yes.
that is the next frontier. Women are being oppressed because they can't abort their baby after it's been birthed. Who knows where they're going to go with this next time.
That is the direction and that has
Yes.
been actually spoken of before, and it's been brought up, and there have been articles written by feminists and abortionists that say, well, we should be able to abort this child before it turns 3, and that has trickled down to feminists,
Wow.
because we know from a psychological perspective that cognition and awareness of self occurs between 3 and 5. And they're going to use that argument to say that if we abort this child before it turns 3, it wasn't a person. And it just keeps going and going, and
Wow.
Yeah,
line
maybe
And,
dehumanizing
and in the meantime, they're lowering the age of sexual consent in some cases down to
and
12 and
legitimizing.
14.
Yep.
well,
Sounds like an excuse for human sacrifice.
well, it almost seems that they are
It
going to.
does, Amy.
Well, yeah, no, I agree with that, Amy. But it almost seems like they're going to try and there's hundreds of different avenues they could go down, but it seems like they're going to try and continually look for new oppressed things that need to be overcome to pacify the mob, that their rulers are not fucking them over at the top, that it's really it's like this group or that group, it's some law here or there that's stopping true freedom from coming. And I just think these things are ways to pacify all these little social movements, all of them. These things that need to be overcome. Oh, we're being oppressed. We're living in the past. This kind of speech has kind of gone on for 20 years now.
Bro,
And
slavery is freedom and ignorance is strength and
yeah,
War is
it's
peace.
war
This
is
is all
peace.
going somewhere.
Uh-huh.
There is an agenda here, and we are moving in a certain direction. And this direction is, and I'm sure you're aware, and anyone who watches your video is going to be aware, that there is actually a movement to depopulate the planet, and that there is a consensus amongst our elites that there are too many people on the planet, and we're causing too much impact on the environment, and we're going to this and that. Now, in order for them to depopulate the planet if they want, first they um, need to take our sanctity for life away from us. Okay, they need to dehumanize humans in a way
Yes.
that makes us react with emotion when huge amounts of people die. People are committing suicide, and they in Europe you're allowed to go and kill yourself in Europe for pretty much whatever reason you want, and they using all these techniques, and we've been talking about them, to demoralize in such a way, and a weak mind, or a mind that's a question of itself, its identity, is very vulnerable to suggestion. And then you end up with teenagers who believe that all humanity is just a virus on the planet. I mean, this has been said many times, that humanity is just a virus,
Yes.
and but you end up with teenagers who believe that we're just, and they become suicidal, and the suicide rate has just it's not but it's not discussed in the media as it should be, but um, we are seeing suicide um, like we've never seen before, and only Japan has had similar suicide, and it's increasing there as well. And this is tech, the technology that's disconnecting young people from each other, um, the demoralization of the sexuality. Um, you don't know how many sexes there are. the feminism out of control, women who truly believe that men are responsible for all the world's problems and believe that be
Hey,
exterminated.
what do you think of this? What do you think of this, Daniel? Jay Walker brought up a good point, and it's something that I've thought about myself as we cover these topics. Like last week, we covered the cannibalism thing, and
Oh yeah,
this
I'd love to spend 5 minutes on that with you.
well, okay, I don't really want to step on my buddy's toes, and I'm pretty sure he's going to go live in about 20 minutes at 10 o'clock. So we're going to shut this down at 10.
Okay, yeah, we've got to make sure we shut her down at 10. But
Yeah,
Dan,
so we got about 20 minutes. Go ahead, finish Gandalf real quick.
I would love it if you were to come over and stick around. I maybe leave a comment in the side chat. I'd love to subscribe to your channel.
Yeah, Gandalf, I'll get you his channel. Daniel, if you want to leave a comment in the side chat so other people can subscribe to you if they like. Also, if you want to, you can drop a link, or if you leave a comment, I'll give you a wrench, and then you can drop a link to your main channel, the one that you have 1,500 subscribers on.
The one that's linked in my promos.
Yeah, the one with the icon that's in the promo. But I want to throw this at you real quick. Jay Walker made a point. He said, "Don't you think that even debating this stuff is playing into their hands?"
Certainly not. I left a comment to Jay basically in more or less that we're not debating this. I don't think what we're doing right here is debating. I think factually, ethically, morally, they're completely wrong. We've already won. There is no debate. These people are dead wrong.
Speaking
And
of,
they should.
you know what? You're right, Gandalf. Look at this. If you're on my live chat right now, or if you can see what I'm doing, I should be screen sharing. Oh yeah, I am screen sharing on the Hangout, so you can at least see this. If you go to this video on their channel and you check the comments, first thing you'll notice. Let me jump back up. The first thing you'll notice is that the like and the dislike have been disengaged. Okay,
No, why?
Chicken,
so
chicken.
that's first. And then if you go
It's
down
an illusion.
and you look at the comments are left under this video, it's you know, I knew this phrase would end up being a butthurt phrase to someone someday. Shaking my damn head. Ha! They disabled the like and dislike count. Aha! I guess it's cool now to call someone it, and we haven't even gotten to that part yet.
Yeah, really.
LOL! They disabled the likes and dislikes. All right, you're getting deported. Hey, what's up? Any anyway, hey guys, what's up? Somebody's just trolling a little bit. What the fuck? Feminism gone way too far. Plus, what's up with the likes dislikes being turned off? There's a comment down here. I wanted it so much privilege. What a dickhead. See you turn the likes off. Let me see. This guy here says, this guy GER W. He says the term guys has been used inclusively for about 90 years. If you bother to do actual research and study etymology, instead of celebrating its inclusive nature, which it is, it has an absolute inclusive nature. When you walk in a room and say, hey guys, that means everyone. We all know
Yep.
this.
Yep.
You decide to add the division of the sexes by redefining it how you see fit. We've already covered that. Daniel pointed that out. Absolutely.
Exactly what it is.
This guy says, I saw dislikes 10 to 20 times more than likes on this video yesterday, but now the information is no longer available. Why? So yeah, they just did this yesterday, I guess, or yeah, he left that comment 33 minutes ago. So yeah, the dislikes were 10 to 20 times more than the likes on this video. So that I scanned through a big portion of the comment thread, and that's so you're right, Gandalf. We're winning. This shit is they're wrong, and we're simply pointing out that they're wrong.
Yeah, that's why we're winning, because we are here discussing and unpacking.
Yes.
And more and more people are becoming aware of it. And you cannot defeat the truth. The truth is its own weapon, and it will win every time. And if anyone's really demoralized, it's them. because they haven't gotten everything their own way, and
Yeah.
the tide has turned. And I'm very reluctant to say that we're winning, but because you know what sort of things they have up their sleeve. But um, I do get a feeling that there's been a real change, a real shift in the consciousness, and that uh, people are daily coming to terms and becoming aware of these weapons that are being used against us, and the inconsistencies between what we're being shown on the television news compared to the reality of things. And you could use Donald Trump as an example, and that the lies that they have spewed about him, whether he's good for us or not, he was not. He was certainly not expected to win that election. And whoever's in charge of the media in the United States was very unhappy about his.
I disagree. Whoever's in charge of the media are owned by the same people that own the corporation, the United States of America.
I think yeah.
And it's all a play.
I think a lot of that was manufactured as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you might be right about that, but it was a very good production.
The Donald Trump outrage, and I'm not in favor of Donald Trump. Let me just make that clear. I'm not at all in favor of Donald Trump, but I think this over exaggerated hatred and vitriol toward Trump is largely manufactured. He's a lying scumbag, piece of crap, criminal, gangster, just like the rest of them. So
yes,
yeah.
So, I don't think he was the gangster they wanted, though. And even if the whole thing was and a production for us and our benefit, then they've really overplayed, because just that anyone who watches what they show us on the news and then goes and sees what he actually said, they become aware that there is now this inconsistency, and they stop trusting the news media because we know that they lie. And
yeah, you know, when you look at American politics and our choices between a celebrity, literally a reality TV celebrity, Donald Trump, criminal gangster, and Hillary fucking Clinton. If that's our choice between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, the only conclusion I can say is we're fucked.
Yes.
When you had John Kerry versus George Bush,
yeah,
the same secret society.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
Things were there. It was.
It's all a play.
All right, let's
all a play.
Let's try to get through this, and maybe we can spare a few minutes if Daniel wants to talk about the cannibalism topic we covered last week. So
okay, well, I do want to say that
you guys, there are 13 minutes until the 13th hour begins.
Oh, okay.
On Friday the 13th, no less.
Evan did want me to bring up the difference between ethics and morals. Is that something I can do?
If you can do it really fast, can you wait? Can we try to get through this video?
Yes,
maybe.
Yes, we'll get through that video, and then we'll see if
I'll tell you what. I'll bump up the speed on this video, and I'll try not to stop it so many times, but it's going to be tough. All right, here we go.
It just seems lazy, inconsiderate, and a small part of what reinforces the gender hierarchy today. How is one to feel empowered to speak or assert themselves when upon greeting they are misgendered or even ignored in language? Can we be surprised that for decades women often felt uncomfortable asserting their voice when we didn't even take the time to properly acknowledge them?
That's largely untrue, actually. In history, especially in the home, and she covers this, my mother made no bones about speaking up, and I guess you guys had mothers that were similar.
Exactly.
Okay, let's
false premise.
The linguistic tendencies were developed and reinforced.
These linguistic tendencies were developed and reinforced in eras where women were barely meant to be seen and certainly not heard. Please.
Again, that's fucking bullshit.
Yep.
Note, you're not a bad feminist if you're comfortable with using the phrase, guys. There are larger issues that we, the feminists, need to combat.
Here we go. Stop right there. There are larger issues that we, the feminists, need to combat. Yeah, like how about rights, Like, how about fucking cultures around the world that still require women to wear cloth bags? There are larger issues that we, the feminists, need to combat. Like, how about entire countries and entire religions that allow the men to beat the crap out of the women for the crime of showing a little bit of ankle skin?
Yeah, and here's another thing that's bringing people to the reality and truth of what's going on is that the champions of the LGBTQIP plus movement are the champions of the Islamic repopulation of the United States and Europe. I mean, there is a huge inconsistency there that, as people become aware of, you've got to ask the question, why? Why is the worst kind of misogyny tolerated in one culture, and then our culture, where misogyny was disappearing and evaporating, has suddenly we're all being beaten in the head with a stick for it.
Yep.
It's not right there.
To combat reproductive rights, rape culture, violence against women, LGBTQ rights.
Reproductive, there it is.
Violence against women. Now, I'm not denying violence against women, and I'm not poo-pooing the idea, but statistically, if you're a man, you're more likely to have violence against you. That's just a fact. Men die in war, men die on the job in overwhelming numbers above and beyond women.
True.
And in terms of general violence, men are more likely to have violence against them than women. That is almost.
Another problem that we're seeing now is girls are starting to fight each other like men used to. So now we have women who are behaving like men, and I've seen some horrific videos with women fighting each other, and this didn't used to happen like
Now,
that.
when you say women, are you talking about high school? Because I wouldn't classify them as women. They're still girls.
I'm saying high school to their mothers getting involved and into the brawl as well.
Okay. Well, if you've seen those videos, then I wouldn't be shocked if they're out there. But I know what you're talking about. There's a lot of videos out there with videos of girls fighting in school. I just want to try to clarify, get some clarity on.
Cat fight. Remember, it was a cat fight. It used to be very rare, and it was a big thing when it happened. Not anymore. It's happening all the time.
You're right about that. It is happening more. Moving on.
And the general reprogramming of most people's minds when
The general reprogramming of most people's minds. That's exactly what you're doing right here, sweetheart.
Yeah. This is the generalization of the method. She has to say it.
comes to the valuation of women in society.
When it comes to the valuation of women in society, but you don't seem very concerned. You're more concerned about us using the term. You're more concerned about policing the language that we use. If you were concerned about bigger, broader issues like you just mentioned a damn minute ago, then maybe this video would be geared toward the culture that requires women to wear cloth bags.
Society. But when you stop valuing the personhood and visibility of individuals, you make it easier to dehumanize.
Is that an example? Look what she just showed. There's a woman standing in the middle, and the guys shake hands. They have to cross the woman. But when you stop valuing the personhood and visibility, and then watch.
And visibility of individuals,
This is not a thing.
This is not a thing. You're right.
Nope.
This is not a thing.
It isn't. I like the way she's wearing the black and white.
We used to stand up.
And red cup, red, black, and white. There's your communism colors.
There's your.
Listen, when a lady walked in the room, men used to stand. Not for other men, but when a lady walked in the room to join a group, every man would stand.
Yep.
In respect to that woman walking in the room.
Very true.
And in some cases that still happens, perhaps largely a rare occasion, but it does still happen. Chivalry is not dead. Let's not.
You guys with only 7 minutes to go, I don't want to detract, but I see like a quasi-Masonic handshake here. I don't know about anyone else.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess Maybe
This
so.
is so clearly propaganda. It isn't even funny.
Here to dehumanize them on a macro scale, minimizing his, her, its, their right.
Stop right there. His, her, its, their right to respect and equality. Who identifies themselves as it?
This is dehumanizing. This is
This,
like you
this
don't want to.
yeah, go
You
ahead.
call a baby that you don't know its gender it, and that's it.
Who identifies themselves as it?
Not me.
Hey, you guys, this is culture creation. This is like what Alan Watt would always go back to: is they're creating the culture.
Cultural Marxism.
Yeah, well, listen to some Alan Watt about cultural creation. Like it's manufactured, it's meant to become the new culture, and it's propaganda that's pushing that. It's not a natural development in society. You know,
No.
you go out and you ask anyone, hey, don't you think it's a good idea that trans women are allowed to go into the bathroom? 99% of people that you'll confront, like say you could go to a mall, go ask a random person, a woman, a man, a teenager, don't you think it's wrong that trans people aren't allowed to use this washroom? What do you think 90% of those people are going to say to you? They're going to say, fuck that shit. That's fucking retarded. They're not going to say, oh yeah, they're being oppressed. It's this online fake culture that they're trying to develop. It's not the mentality of the real humanity, real people outside of the internet, outside of the news cycle. This is fake.
This is the worst kind of propaganda because it contradicts itself at every turn. Just 2 seconds ago, this woman said, but when you stop valuing the personhood and visibility, and then literally, let me see, we are at 2:25, 2 minutes 25 seconds. Literally 8 seconds later, she says this, minimizing his, her, its, their right.
Yeah.
Its.
This
I'm
is
minimizing its right. How do I minimize its right? If you self-identify as it, you've already minimized your own fucking right and your own personhood.
Yes.
which is the goal.
You just broke my brain, lady.
This is linguistic programming. This whole thing is programming,
Yes.
and it is consistent with all the other programming to break your brain. Okay, to have you see yourself no longer as a him or a her, but as it, as an object, not a spiritual being experiencing life as a part of a virus infesting a planet. And this is the way they go about doing it. This is just a very sort of fringe part of it. But the
That last 8 seconds literally just fucking broke my brain.
so
When she goes on and she says talking about dehumanizing and minimizing people's visibility, and then she goes on to say, well, we don't want to minimize and dehumanize people who identify as it, do we? What the holy fuck are we talking about?
she just did exactly what she said we ought not to do.
Yep.
But look, Rufus, let me quickly say, you were surprised that 8% of the people that this cannibal promoting guy got to admit that they would eat human flesh.
Yeah, and then I took a poll in my audience.
Yeah, but you see, these are both straw polls, and now he has just stood in front of that group of people and told them why they should. Okay, and about 8% is about 12% less than placebo. So if he could only convince 8% of his audience that what he was promoting was okay, he lost. He failed.
Oh, really? Oh, really? So placebo is what, 20%?
Yeah, so he should have gotten 20% of those people to agree with him no matter what he was talking about. If he was
Interesting
Awesome.
point. Fantastic point there. Bravo.
Yes.
So don't be disheartened. People are not interested in eating each other.
I couldn't
Not
get anybody in my audience to even. The question was, would you try it? And we're not
Yeah.
talking about, survival. We're not talking about life or death survival scenario. We're talking about, hey, life is good, and here, try some human. No
Yeah.
thanks. You know what I
If you
mean?
can only get 8% to agree after giving them a 2-hour talk or whatever on the benefits and how it's not a problem, and if he's had all that time to convince them that it's not so bad, and he only got 8% of them, then he failed miserably in his attempt to
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Me too.
Excellent point. I would give you a round of applause, but I'd overload my mic, I'm sure.
I think that that's probably a good place to leave this, because it shows that there is hope. Humanity does have the difference between morals and ethics.
Yeah,
Oh,
Amy, do it, Amy.
really
Go now,
fast,
go
really
now.
fast. The
Ethics is
difference,
something we agree on.
the difference between morals and ethics is that morals are subjective, ethics are not.
Yes.
It is moral to stone a woman to death for wearing a bikini in public some places, but not others. However, it is never ethically acceptable to do it. We do not hurt or kill the flesh of another. We do not take or damage stuff that doesn't belong to us, and we do not defraud one another. That's ethics.
Awesome.
Morals can be anything that a group of people think is okay.
So the main takeaway is that morals are subjective, ethics are objective.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Daniel, I could hear you piping up. You tend to agree with that.
Yeah. Our morals are what we agree upon as being ethical.
Through culture.
Yeah. But ethics are rooted in our psyche, but our morals are actually what we agree upon as
Yes.
ethical.
Cool. Excellent. Excellent job. Excellent job explaining, and excellent job keeping it short and sweet. We are now at the 10-minute mark, and my friend Ray of Creation, Josh's stream is going to be fired up any minute now, and we're good buddies, and we're trying not to step on each other's toes.
Yeah, you sent me a link to that. I tried to go there last time, and I found a Creation channel, but I didn't see a live stream. So send me a link to his channel,
I'll,
and but
yep, I'll give you a link in Skype when we get done here. And Daniel, thank you so much. It's been a fascinating conversation, and we will do this again. You're a super interesting guy to speak to.
it's been an absolute pleasure, and I've enjoyed it thoroughly.
So,
And yeah, I'd be happy to return.
final thoughts, everybody.
Love always, guys.
Daniel, final
Yeah,
thoughts.
love. Yeah,
Hey,
Amy's right. It's love. Just focus on love and try to take all the fear out of your life and anger, because they do you harm that you don't understand. Physical, spiritual, mental. If you just focus on love, the instant you feel a bit of road rage coming on, uh, beat it. Okay, kick it down, stop it, and eventually you won't get angry at people on the road anymore. It'll take about 21 days, and your entire mission will change, and you'll stop getting angry, and you'll stop being afraid. And if you can do that, everything in your life will change. You'll be healthier, you'll be happier, and yeah. Well, that's my final thought.
Excellent, Daniel, and thank you again for your time. It's been a pleasure. Gandalf, you want to say something finally? Final thought?
I guess he's not.
Oh,
He dropped off.
okay.
He's gone to
we got a runner.
He's gone to watch Ray of Creation.
We got a runner. All right, you guys know my final thought. It's the same as always. Be good to each other and pick up your damn trash. And with that, I thank you, and we will see you next week. And I'm not sure what we have planned for next week, but I do have Ken Humphreys. He's a biblical scholar. His YouTube channel is called Jesus Never Existed. And when I get him, I'm in email contact with him, and he's interested. It's just a matter of scheduling. That's going to be a fascinating conversation. The guy is brilliant. He's debated at Oxford. This guy is no joke. And also, we have Allison Twist O'Neill has actually agreed to come on and discuss Reiki. And when we get a chance to do that, we'll get that scheduled. And we're going to let her come on and discuss what Reiki is all about. And I'm going to give her a hard time because I don't believe in it, but we're going to have a respectful conversation. And So we're going to give her a chance to explain her position, and then we're going to go over what kind of proofs and evidence we can come up with. And that should be an interesting conversation. And I'm glad that Daniel mentioned the placebo at 20%. I wasn't sure of what percentage placebo had an effect, but Allison and I have had a long email conversation lately, very recently, ongoing, in fact, on the subject of Reiki, and I keep bringing up the placebo effect. And so, thank you, Daniel. I wasn't aware of the 20% margin, so thanks for that. So look out, Allison. I got a clinical psychologist who just gave me the 20% margin on placebo.
It
So
can be higher. So it can be higher than 20%. It could be 20 to 30%. So bear that in mind.
okay. So we're going to be going over those things. And Allison, if you would like to come join us next week, maybe we can schedule that. And it'll be as respectful as always. There will be no attacking, and we'll make you feel warm and welcome. You can share your ideas, but do be prepared that I will be challenging your ideas. I will respect you as a person, and I will challenge your ideas. So, with that, everybody, be good to each other, pick up your trash, and we will see you next week. I'm out.